a gay person, but at this point in time are at least open to the possibility of maintaining sort of a celibate life, a chaste life as the church defines it. And what does that look like? And is there Welcome back, everyone. Craig here. I have a guest, Matthew. Matthew is has been in our community for a while. I think you found us on Twitter, or at least that's where I first saw you.
Yep.
And you've been in our Discord a little bit. And Matthew has I would say, a pretty compelling story or some things that he's dealing with and thinking about that we wanted to do an episode. So with that, Matthew, go ahead and introduce yourself. Just give us some background, any information that you would like to share, and then let's start talking.
Sure. Yeah. So as you said, my name's Matthew Guertin. I'm a gay Catholic, trying to figure out how to live an authentic life as such. I don't find myself agreeing with either of the dominant sides here. Those who say, well, just go and live that out in the way that the culture right now is saying to live that out. And I don't agree at all really with the side B types who are like, well, just sort of live through this story that will give you about desire, love in general, and you'll be fine. It doesn't quite work. I don't think we can get into that as things go on. My background. So I have the equivalent of 3 masters, basically. So I have a master's, a mag theol in theology and STM, and then I have an STL, a licentiate in sacred theology. I also possess, and both of those from the International Theological Institute. Although if they find out about my thinking on things, they might end up trying to take those away. Thankfully, I think the first one is through the Austrian state government, and then the other one is from Rome. So I don't think there's much they can do about that.
Good.
And then I have a master's degree in philosophy. I was a PhD student at the University of Dallas from 2016 until 2022 when I withdrew. So I have that in my background. My main interests theologically and philosophically, mainly philosophically, revolve around issues of cognition and desire, cognition and love, sometimes the interplay of those two, and how that sort of plays out, or how or cognition as it's involved in making choices, moral responsibility. Moral responsibility is a big interest of mine, and how that works out, especially from a more or less Lonerganian perspective. Bernard Lonergan, and well, the 3 major influences on my thinking: Bernard Lonergan, so the 20th century Catholic philosopher theologian.
He was a Jesuit, right?
He was a Jesuit, exactly, yes. And then another Jesuit, Pierre Rousselot, hugely influential actually on 20th century theological developments, but most people don't know about him. And then Hans-Georg Gadamer. Others, but those are some major influences there.
Gadamer was he a cleric?
He was not, and he apparently had an interest in religion and Christianity, but he never became an active believer. Apparently he taught for a while. I think it was at Boston College, or he was at Boston College for a little while, and he would go and attend mass, but he was never a believer.
Was Lonergan at Boston College?
So he was I'm not sure where he wound up. I'm not that familiar with his life on the ground, more just work, because he was in Canada before the war, but then after he might have wound up at Boston. I'm not sure.
It's funny how life goes, and when I started learning a little bit about your background, it sort of connected some dots for me, and I think I may have shared this with you, but so long time ago, long before I got married and had all these kids, I was in the seminary. I have a BA in philosophy, which seems pretty teeny tiny compared to your credentials. But I was going to be a priest. I spent 3 years in seminary, and I was sort of at the end of my third year that I made the difficult decision to leave. But I finished out my degree because I already had 3 years in and got my philosophy degree, and I really had a couple of options. One being to go on to graduate school, and Boston College was actually one of the places that I was looking at, and I think strangely enough, one of my college mentors, I think that's where he got his doctorate, was, or maybe he's still working on it, for Boston College, and he was heavily influenced by Lonergan. So that's why I wasn't sure if Lonergan had been out there. But I came real close to going to graduate school at Boston College, assuming they would have taken me, and studied philosophy and or theology, and then I ended up taking a different route, became a fireman instead. But I remember when I did my senior thesis on Humani Vitae many years ago, Lonergan was one of the key sources in there that I had to wrestle with. And now, was he still like a priest in good standing at the end? I mean, I don't know. My recollection from having studied him a long time ago is, at least on his commentary on like Humani Vitae and Catholic, or at least Catholic sexual ethics, he seemed to have pushed the envelope a little bit in terms of thought in on that. And did he ever reach the point where he departed from the priesthood, or did he just always kind of more, I would say, on the left side of things?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I would divide things quite up that way. My understanding is that he lived and died a priest in good standing.
Okay.
If you look at some of his works, so in Christology, for instance, you see, at least by my lights, you see a man very much keen on thinking through things authentically, but staying within the realm of Catholic orthodoxy. I was never, so he never struck me as the kind of person that, say, Curran became, Monsignor Curran.
Yep.
And in fact, like the work in Christology I have in mind, at least when I last engaged it, it struck me as the work of someone who was almost maybe even excessively concerned about staying within established orthodoxy, which made some sense. There was the whole sort of so-called modernist crisis and really witch hunt that.
Well, because what was his time frame? Like, when was he in ministry and academia?
So I think it was began in the 30s or so. I think he began, so I'm not sure when because his doctoral dissertation, Grace and Freedom, I think that might have been written in the 40s. So I think, as far as I recall, he began his studies in earnest, higher studies, I think it was in the 30s, but I'd have to check on that. And then, if I recall, the war in some way interrupted his work for a time.
Was he in Europe or something? Is that the cause of the interruption, or?
I don't recall. I don't recall what it was. I remember running into that in his biography. And again, I haven't paid all that much attention to his biography. He ended up passing in the 70s, I think it
Oh,
was.
so post Vatican II, was he still kind of active up until the end? Do you know, or
That I don't know. I think it was 10 years before he died. He had to have a lung excised due to cancer. So lung cancer. When he was writing Method in Theology. According to a Lonergan scholar, I know that. I mean, that's why if you read Method in Theology, it seems quickly written because he thought he was going to die. He didn't. He lived another 10 years.
yeah, this I just did Wikipedia and says he died in 1984 at age 79.
Oh,
So
okay.
I just couldn't remember if he was still. I assume he was still kind of influential when Humani Vitae came out in '68 and the Second Vatican Council, in the mid '60s, early '60s. So
Mm-hmm.
he must. Okay, all right. Well, so let me ask you this question, just because I have to ask this question. If you don't want to answer this question, feel free to say no. But given you're not married, have no children, right? You're a single person, right?
A single person. Yep.
Is the priesthood something that you have entertained? Just, I mean, given your background and credentials, it seems like they could just put you on the fast track and ordain you if that was something you felt called to.
Well, they could. There are a few. There are three issues to that. I mean, one, since the 1970s, it's been official practice, at least on paper, not to admit those with homosexual tendencies to the priesthood. As we know,
Mm-hmm.
on paper that's true, but
Yeah.
but you hear from
Yeah.
So practically speaking, it doesn't really make much of a difference, apparently.
Hmm.
And I remember talking with a priest. I won't name him,
Mm-hmm.
but he was involved in seminary formation, I think, at admission and such. And he said the Vatican simply hasn't clarified what they mean by deep-seated homosexual inclination. And so since they haven't clarified that, it's not clear what is meant. And if it's not clear what is meant, then we can sort of make our own decisions on the ground. There's that. Also, I'm not, I don't watch porn or anything. I mean, in the sense that people mean that usually, but I have my struggles with chastity, and as a result, it doesn't seem like I could responsibly, at least where I am now, unless there were some sort of miracle performed, it doesn't seem like it would be responsible for me to pursue that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And finally, the third obstacle would be, as I go on, and as you know, I'm willing to ask questions about things, and I'm not willing to simply accept. So what someone else says, this is what you should think, and this is how you should think it. Well, hold on. I'm the one who has to think it finally. Mm-hmm. I'm the one responsible for my thinking. I'm responsible for the judgments that I make, the actions I take, not external authorities finally. Well, I'm wondering about the reasonableness of this. There are questions. And as far as I can tell, that's if you go into the priesthood with like that, you're going to run into some problems. And also, I mean, I just don't know. I've tended to. I mean, one reason why I've tended to wrestle over the last many years with the church's teaching on homosexuality and such is that I've felt the force of the biblical notion that it's not good for man to be alone.
Mm-hmm.
And how and could I really live a life of celibacy and have the life that we're made for? So basic.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It that makes perfect sense. I mean, we did, and I think I may have pointed this out to you one time because I don't remember if you were following us at that time, but we did an interview with Leo Amberst, can't think of his name, former priest, I guess. I don't think there's any secret that he's a gay man.
I think so. Yeah.
I don't know that he's been laicized, but he's not in active ministry. I don't know. He doesn't seem to hold himself out as a priest. And if I think of it, Andy, I'll have you link to that below that interview. One of the things that really struck out for me is he didn't seem bitter necessarily, but he was very clear about one of the struggles with one of the things that was really, I don't know, missing or made that vocation difficult was just the inability just for human touch, just to hug and hold someone, whether you sex or not, just
Right.
that human touch connection that you know I think humans have, and this sounds like it's kind of what you're talking about there. That it seems like at least pastorally now, that's just not something that they encourage or allow or whatever. I don't know.
Right.
Um, okay, well, so if you don't mind me asking, and I don't need your age, but you look like you're younger than me. What decade of life are you in?
Well, I could just answer directly. I'm 36. I'm almost
Okay,
37.
okay, and
So,
how old were you when you sort of realized kind of your inclinations and attractions and things like that? Was that something that you figured out early on? Was it something you can you just fill me in a little bit on that at all?
sure. So it started becoming apparent that my desires, inclinations, and such were not going in the expected
Yeah.
direction very early on.
Hmm.
I noticed. I would say I half noticed that. I was raised in a highly conservative Catholic family environment and community. Finally, so
Hmm.
this wasn't exactly something that you could freely acknowledge to yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I noticed it fairly early on, and it didn't. I didn't. It was mostly interior and such. You know, uh, wasn't going out and getting involved with people or whatever. Um, which I mean, side note, as I go on, the more I think about how there are all sorts of formative experiences. You could call them sexual if you want. I don't know if that's fair. That people go through when they start when themselves as beings driven by eros, sort of awaken to themselves as such. Uh, dating, kissing, or whatever. All these things. These are formative experiences that are often denied gay Catholics. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, it became clear over time. I refused to accept it, and then I spent, finally when it became clear that that was the way things were, I spent it was about 7.5 years in what Joseph Nicolosi and others call it reparative therapy with a psychiatrist on the faculty at the International Theological Institute, which I started while I was there.
I was going to ask you about that. What your
Yeah.
thoughts are on that, if you have any. I'm assuming you have thoughts. Whether you want to share them or not is up to you.
I do. It's so we do a great disservice, I think, finally, to people to suggest to them that there is this real possibility. So a few things are sort of involved in this. One, we're suggesting that you can change your erotic orientation, and I say erotic because it's not primarily sexual. it can be directed in all sorts of ways. It's primarily, I think, if we pay attention to the phenomenon, an orientation towards particular expressions of human beauty, an inclination towards particular forms of, or inclination towards sets of intimacy with different people, which, even leaving aside sex, towards a particular set of sharing of life with particular sets of people, which, again, leaving aside sex. But anyway, yeah. So I don't think, finally, there's recognition going back even to Plato that people find their erotic inclinations, for whatever reason, or any set of reasons, differently determined, and then you have to do something with that. Reparative therapy, and they suggest, growing out of a particular expression of Freudianism. Most, as far as I understand it, traditional Freudians, when they hear about neo-Freudianism, the strand of Freudianism in the United States that actually gave rise to reparative therapy attempts to therapeutically change sexual orientation, they're like, what is this? This is actually opposed to the very thought of Freud. Freud thought that there was nothing pathological, like in a deep, serious sense, about homosexual inclinations. In a certain sense, it cuts you off from certain forms of life, but it's better to learn to live with that. And it's not a big deal if that's the way you are. But anyway, yeah. So we suggest that it can be changed. All of the people have come out and they've claimed to have undergone change, but then we find out years later, sometimes less, that wasn't true at all. They went, and so if you look at like the implosion of Exodus International, you had different people saying, oh, well, I've undergone orientation change. I'm no longer, God's healed me of my homosexuality. And then you find out they went and got married into what are sometimes called bearded marriages, and they're having, dangerous sexual liaisons with people, not only for themselves but also for their spouses. So it doesn't work. And then in having it too, and sort of there as if it were a live option, then also implied by things like courage and such, that it's an option that should be explored, is suggesting, in some sense, if you find yourself such, if you find yourself gay, there's something wrong with you. There's something pathological about your desires, which you like. We're not going to tell you need to get it changed. And if you look at various church documents, it's like, no one's saying they have to change. But the implication is that you really should explore this. Yeah. An implication furthermore backed up by the fact that, if I were teaching at, as far as I can tell, and I'm open to being proven wrong in this, but as far as I can tell, given the various things I've heard, read about different gay Catholics' experiences in various places, for instance, if I went and taught at a Catholic school, mm-hmm. I've never been with anyone. Mm-hmm. I'm celibate, but if they were simply to find out that I am gay and that I have questions, yeah, I would risk being fired. And this is true about all sorts of sectors in the church. So you can't really fit in the church. So, but here's this thing that you could explore. We're not going to tell you should, but actually we're really implying that you should. But it doesn't work. It didn't work. It certainly didn't work for me. It worsened any number of problems I had, and I got better and freer when I gave that up and just started working on accepting me and my energies and such as they are, and trying to find a way forward. Can you hear me? Wait,
Yep. Okay, we're good. We had to take a brief break. Can you hear me? Okay.
I can, yes.
Okay. So one question I had, and I've always wondered about this. You know, you talked about eros love, and as a person that's not gay, I can't. You know, I can sort of imagine, like I try to imagine myself essentially being the same person I am, having the same attractions that I have, for example, my wife or women, but simply as men. And I've always wondered, is it just simply the same feelings, same attractions, just a different gender, or is the whole I guess the whole thing different? Because, like, for example, my wife, um, you know, before we're married or whatever, but certainly my wife, since we're married, is someone that I'm deeply attractive to, want to spend time with. But undoubtedly, when I see her, around the house, there's a strong sexual desire to be with her. Um, that I think would be very, and so that would be, that's a strong drive for us.
Right.
Do you know? Can you tell me? Is it more or less the same type of experience you have? Because so for me, and we talk about this all the time on the show. For us, man, we are married, have an intimate relationship with our spouses, but chastity is an issue for us. Like, it is certainly an issue for us during periods of abstinence and all this and that, because we can't be intimate when we would like to be intimate, and a lot of us struggle with those times. Is it more or less the same thing for you, or do you think it's a total different experience?
That's a good question, and I'm not sure how fully I can answer it. The issue being that I'm on
Mm-hmm.
the opposite divide as
Yeah,
you, so I can't
yeah.
I can't inhabit both
Mm-hmm.
and say I am inclined to say that, I mean, we're all human,
Mm-hmm.
and so there's going to be something specifically the same, and some things you're describing. So, for instance, I mean, just being sexually attracted by the presence of one
Mm-hmm.
you're attracted to and
Mm-hmm.
such, wanting to spend time with them, sure. I wonder, and I don't know if this having been explored by anyone, but I wonder, I would be inclined to think that there are going to be some differences, and important differences, just given that the symbology operative in a heterosexual erotic life, again talking about desire and such, I'm
Mm-hmm.
not talking about
Mm-hmm.
sex primarily,
Yeah.
or a homosexual erotic life, because they are worked out obviously differently. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're married to a woman where you have kids, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
things in the normal course of events.
Mm-hmm.
So your love is conditioned in its meaning by the possibility of having kids, and then you have kids, and that further conditions
Mm-hmm.
your shared erotic life. Um, for someone who's gay, that's obviously not biologically possible, whatever anyone wants to believe.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's not biologically possible. So the biological working out of the thing is going to be different, obviously, if it even should be worked out biologically. And that's certainly going to play into the shape and the directionality of that erotic life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I I wonder. So I mean, one thing, and I don't know. So there's an obvious biological fecundity to the normal working out of eros between men and women, and that plays a profound role in figurations of desire, paintings, poetry, or whatever. If you look at predominantly homoerotic poetry, so like if you look in the West, Europe and such, love poems are primarily love poems, figurations of love, etc. Presentations of love are primarily between a man and at least in Europe, but sort of a distant transcendently beautiful woman.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you look at the Islamic poetic tradition, which I don't see really any Catholics doing, which is unfortunate, it's the beloved is primarily a young man, or unfortunately boy. That was the time and the way things were. Not to excuse it, but
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but so it's primarily homoerotic,
Hmm.
and so there, sort of what ends up being the goal, or what ends up being the desired thing, is union, instead of procreation, say. So,
Mm-hmm.
if you got married traditionally, it's like we want to further our line. Whereas if you look at homoerotic poetry in the Islamic tradition, the desire is union, and a union of hearts and minds, wherein what is sort of born is greater insight, greater appreciation for beauty, greater wisdom, which is then used to sort of say, what I'm really after is union with God, the ultimate beloved. So there's homoerotic poetry in the Islamic tradition, at least the Sufi tradition, and saying, okay, you're desiring this thing, and we're going to be talking about that, but then we're going to recognize that what we're really after is union with God. So homoeros is seen as sort of a particular path towards the ultimate beloved God.
Okay, we had a little technical difficulty. Why don't you go ahead and continue where you're at?
Okay, yeah, sure. So just to recap, in case the lower volume was hard for some people to understand. So basically, so on the one hand, in heterosexual desire, the normal working out of erotic desire, what is aimed at partially and what conditions that for oneself psychologically and otherwise is the possibility of children and the raising of children and such. So that sort of fecundity. In homoerotically determined eros, that's obviously not possible biologically. So where is it going? And some people would point to that non-possibility biologically as an indication that there's a kind of complete pathology here. But hold on, no one says, even normal heterosexual couples, married couples, aren't going to say, well, that the main point is children. I mean, that's a big point, but there's so
Depends
much
who
more
you
to
ask. Yeah, it depends who you ask.
Well, depends who you ask, but then I look, you could say various things, but what is the form of your life, and what are you doing? Are you really acting as if that is simply the case?
Mm-hmm.
I suspect not, and the tradition suggests as much. But anyway, but yeah, so if you look at the one tradition that has really wrestled, I think, with homosexual desire in a way that the West has yet to do, the Islamic poetic tradition, especially the Sufi poetic tradition in the Ottoman Empire and in Persia, the goal is union with a beautiful beloved, but then in a physical way, but then that's usually taken as indicating a desire for union with the ultimate beloved, namely God. God figured as male. So the encounter with a beautiful, being erotically responsive to a beautiful beloved person, male, and then being drawn towards union with this person is then taken as an indication that the heart is really longing for God, and so to move on towards there, even if it's through this physical relationship. So ideally, you might be together, but the fruit of that relationship is greater contemplation and movement towards union with the ultimate beloved God.
And in that tradition, is that sort of as an alternative to, let's say, a more conventional relationship where you have a wife and children and all that? Was that type of relationship sort of viewed as an equal option, or maybe even a better option? Did they see that as almost a higher calling, given their view of they didn't have a triune God. They viewed Allah as a man. And what was it something that was, let's say, tolerated, or recognized an alternative, or even elevated, that type of relationship?
Well, a few things. First of all, if you look at the poetic traditions themselves, just because you encounter homoerotic poetry doesn't mean that you're encountering the work of someone who lived that way.
Mm.
So just like in the Latin West, say, the ideal beloved was a certain kind of woman, and the ideal loving relationship was between a man and a woman. Someone could write that and not be erotically inclined that way. That was the convention.
Mm-hmm.
So we have on record, people who wrote this sort of thing, and we have records of people who wrote this sort of poetry, homoerotic poetry, according to the conventions of the time, who didn't live that. So there's some issues. It was quite complicated. On the one hand, as I understand it, and Islamic scholars and such can, of course, I hope they correct me if they hear this, but Sharia law doesn't allow it.
Mm-hmm.
But you do find passages of the Quran that seem to sort of hint, like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, if you are, don't worry, like you'll get what you want.
Mm.
But it's not allowed. But society on the ground tolerated it
Mm-hmm.
differently at different times in different places. And unfortunately, it was that early it was pederastic in the Ottoman Empire. I don't know so much about Persia. But I would assume so, given general practice there, like it was in Greece. It developed in that way. At least if you read, it's a great book, the Age of Beloveds. I can actually send you a link to the book later on, perhaps, by Walter Andrews and I forget his name, Kopaklı. It's a Turkish scholar, but basically comparing and contrasting Renaissance views of beloveds and then Ottoman understandings of beloveds. But anyway, so it was tolerated, and anyway, they think one reason why you had this sort of homoerotic and unfortunately pederastic culture, poetic culture and such develop is women were generally considered less than men. So the thought was that you can't have a full human intellectually satisfying relationship with a woman. And if you can't have that and you need that as a human being, well, where are you going to go? You're going to go to those who can, and that's other men or your youth or whatever. They suggest that if things had been different, we might not have seen things develop in that way. So in some sense, it's like, to further your line, you have to get married and such. But this didn't necessarily stop all sorts of people from pursuing this other thing on the side, as yes, in some ways, at least within some circles, considered a higher thing, precisely because there's there's a greater intellectuality to the thing, purportedly at least.
That's interesting. It's almost it almost sounds like our Catholic view of celibacy without the celibacy, like sort of it's a higher calling. You're not distracted, but you're not limited by domestic life, or like you said, it seems like they really viewed women as a necessary evil because we got to have children somehow. If we didn't have to have children, maybe then we that seems, at least that's what I'm kind of hearing from you anyway.
Yeah, and there's yes, and you find that. I mean, if you wanted, you'd have to take it out of context and such, but in some way. But there's a passage in the Summa Theologiae in which Aquinas argues, or at least avers, that in fact men are better Yeah, so there's a passage in the Summa Theologiae, I can't quite remember where it was, in which Aquinas is thinking about human life and such pre-fall. And he avers that males or men make better companions than women, and that if it weren't, basically we'd be better off if we were all just men, but you need women to keep the human race going. So so we have it. So I mean, you have it there, and so it's there in our tradition just as much as it is in other traditions, just in a different way.
Was that something and I don't know, is the Summa Theologiae set up the same way as Theologica, where it's like 3 or 4 objections and then he responds to it? Is it on the top of the line or the bottom of the line?
Just a different. So if you look at, so I've never understood why. So it's the same thing. Some people will call it the Summa Theologica, which I don't understand, because if you look at the Latin, it's Summa Theologiae. It's a summary of theology.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I thought, for some reason, I thought they were separate treatises, same document. So
same document, yeah.
So when he said that, was that one of the above the line or below the line comments that he made?
It's been years since I've encountered that. If I recall it, I don't know. It was either in the Respondio or it was in one of the replies to objections.
Because I see a lot of people, and it's been a few years, and I'm hardly as knowledgeable about Aquinas as you probably are, but my recollection is that, so he had the objections at the top, which were sort of his effort to cast as fairly as possible the best arguments against the point he's going to make.
Yes.
But aren't really the ones he agrees with. Like
right.
But I'll see sometimes people will quote that. And oh, look what Aquinas said. Well, that was not his. That was his characterizing the other side, and then his response is below. So that's why I was asking about that.
That's a key. You're right. That's an important distinction. You might try to draw. If I were drawing this from one of the objections, then I'd be misrepresenting Aquinas.
Yep. Okay.
It's not his thought. Finally, yeah.
Okay. All right. But you're anyway. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So, but I mean, that's so yeah. It was a the way it was seen was complicated, and it depended on who you asked within that social milieu. Some would say it's a horrible thing. Others would say it's a finer thing. Yeah, social reactions to it were complicated, and so you can't just say. Some people might read, let's say, Ottoman poetry and say, they're all perverts, and see Ottoman society was perverse, and no, it's just as complicated as ours. I mean, you had different people thinking different things about these things.
Now, unless it's just exaggerated by the media, at least my perception as a Westerner is, according to video, at least some of the more extreme current versions of Islam, they will throw those people off the roof. So I assume that means that's not acceptable conduct. Is that just simply a different, more I don't even know if conservative is the right word, because the way impression I get you, this wasn't modernist in Islam coming with these ideas. This was sort of this was thought they had, and some people obviously don't think that's true, and that it's offensive to God and not only sinful, but apparently we got to dispose of these people.
Yeah, and it's in some. Yeah, I mean, so Islam tradition, Islam in its laws and such beliefs, it condemns this. Mm-hmm. It condemns homosexual actions and such. So that's why, too, I mean, if you look at the homoerotic poetry, I mean, it recognizes the reality of homoerotically determined eros, but then thinks about the directionality of that thing. But but Islam, as far as I can tell, so just I don't know about it in various places, but if you look at the Ottoman Empire, at least at its height, it was something tolerated, at least in many ways. The modern, and I'm thinking too, if you there was an interview recently with well, not recently, of the last, I don't know, 5 years or so, with the author of Other Names for Love. It's a novel about a homosexual relationship in Pakistan, by a Pakistani author who himself is gay. And he was saying that in this interview, even in Pakistan, the very strongly anti-homosexual relations laws. I wouldn't call them sodomy laws. I think we ultimately use that term wrongly. That term grows out of bad biblical exegesis. But anyway, those laws stem from the time of when they were under British rule. Before then, they didn't worry about this, and in fact, in rural towns, apparently they don't. He was saying, I don't know. I haven't looked at data on the ground, but he's Pakistani. Okay. So it's as far as
Okay, we've been having some technical difficulties. I think there's some weather on Matthew's end, so
yeah.
I'll let you pick up where you left off, Matthew, and then we're going to transition to something a little different.
Yeah, just to wrap up the thing about Islam, I would encourage people to go and actually read up on the history of read up on Islamic social history. Ottoman Empire especially is interesting. What we're seeing now, as far as I can tell, the things that the developments such that someone like me would just get executed for being me, whether I'm sexually involved or not, or if I were, definitely.
Yeah.
That is a very modern. It's like traditionalism in our church, which is itself actually a deeply modern thing.
Yeah.
In many ways sort of a deeply modern reaction to modern developments. So as far as I can tell, we see that there. So it's not quite right to say that's Islam. No, that's a development of Islam in reaction to modern forces and issues.
Interesting. Okay. All right. That was very interesting, and maybe we can talk about that more another time. But I want to kind of shift us to what I think is a really important topic, and I know you have some thoughts / questions, and I have, I guess, some thoughts, questions for what it's worth. But just on the standpoint of kind of coming back to Catholicism a little bit, and you yourself who are Catholic or raised Catholic and want to be Catholic, or however you want to describe yourself. You're a gay person, but at this point in time are at least open to the possibility of maintaining sort of a celibate life, a chaste life, as the church defines it. And what does that look like? And is there a difference between being chaste / celibate and living a solitary life, which I think is sort of the recipe that is promoted? And I, as someone that is married and enjoys a sexual relationship as well as intimate relationship with my wife, while yes, I would miss being able to be physically intimate with her, it would also be hard not to share a household with her and share that companionship and the physical touch and all that stuff that goes into it. So what do you have to say, or where are you at on that? What's your perspective on that? Because I think there's kind of two main camps out there. There's sort of the real strict side, say, don't even share the house. We're not going to recognize this as a quote unquote relationship. And then the other side is, do what you want, ignore the rules, whatever. What's your perspective on all that?
So at this point in time, right, I am a Catholic. I'm not currently going to church, but that's also because, and this sort of touches on issues pertaining to responsible action. I'm not going to church right now because I walk into a church right now and I get sort of full body anxiety. There's a whole history there. So I find it contributes to my own unrest, and that unrest, it worsens it. And that makes it harder to love God, and it makes it harder to love others. So if it's affecting my mental health like that, mental health is more real than physical health if we're Catholic about it. It's like, well, it like if you have a bad cold, you don't go to mass if it's going to make it worse, or whatever. So I'm not. There are lots of people who would say, well, you're committing mortal sin, and like, no. I am making a judgment in conscience, the best judgment I can in this about my own situation, because ultimately I am the one responsible for me before God, not my community. It's if you want me to go and do these things, do what you want me to do. Well, okay, are you going to stand for me before God? Well, no, you're not.
Right.
So what do you do? A few things. So I don't have an answer right now. I've lived a celibate life. I've lived a celibate life. I've gone on one date once, with a guy, and nothing happened. I'm on one dating app. I've talked with some people, but I haven't pursued any sort of sexual romantic relationship really, because it's a question for me. What do I do? So I, in many ways, at least effectively, the church's teachings on homosexual activity make a kind of sense. Like I feel repulsed at the thought of being involved in those sorts of things, and I take that as something. I'm wrestling with that. It's an indication of something. So, okay, there's that. But at the same time, it's not good for man to be alone. I have found living the sort of lonely, isolated existence that the Catholic homosexual is expected to live painful and damaging in many ways. It's not a full life. So what do you do? So I guess my approach to this is, okay, I mean, you have the biblical notion, it's not good for man to be alone, and that we find just empirically living out our lives. We need companionship. Furthermore, I take as a principle the notion of Saint Irenaeus of Lyon, that the glory of God is the human being or man fully alive. So if I'm doing something that I'm supposed to be doing, if I'm leading the life I'm supposed to live, I'm going to be fully alive. And if I'm not fully alive, something is going wrong. I'm living that solitary existence in the way that we're expected to live, at least within the modern church. It actually prevents that sort of being fully alive. So what do you do with that? Connected with that is the notion of Joseph Goldbrunner, holiness is wholeness. So if I'm pursuing holiness, finally, and if I'm doing that in a healthy, good way, I'm going to become more and more whole, integral within myself, in my relationships, and that's going to overflow into concrete, healthy love towards others and such. The solitary life of the gay Catholic doesn't really seem to contribute to that. People who try to live it in the way that side B people have they end up in relationships, or if you believe word I hear in the gay community, they end up engaging in hookups on the down low. So what do you do? what do you do to when, if you look at arguments and such proposed for the contemporary understanding of homosexual desire within the church and such, the arguments tend to be bad, as far as I can tell. I mean, the whole notion of sodomy and such is rooted in bad biblical exegesis. If you look at, the whole story of Sodom, Genesis 19, you can do a really simple thought experiment to see it's not actually about sex, but about gross inhospitality and violence towards strangers. Imagine that those two angels are female. Well, in that scenario, would you take that to be condemning heterosexual sexual activity? Of course not. No one would. And Ezekiel confirms this later on. But anyway, so it's rooted in lots of stuff. But yeah, so I don't know. Finally, an issue is I'm not opposed to a life of celibacy, but if you're to live that, and if you're to live a full life, which is the glory of God, if you're to be whole, if you're not to be alone, no one should be alone. There have to be you need community for that, and you need structures within that community that facilitate that. We have those, or at least we did have those for heterosexual couples and such, but not for people in my position. So we don't have the structures in place, and lots of people are talking about this in different quarters. We don't have the structures in place to facilitate the living out of that life in a healthy way for someone in my position. You can't really become a monk. I mean, you could, but that seems dangerous. And you can't become a priest. And right now, if you try to get involved in all sorts of places, just you being found out to be gay could mean that you're fired. Not even being involved sexually. Finally, too, but so what can you do? Well, two things to keep in mind, I think. One, and tying this back to Lonergan, ultimately, so basically following St. Irenaeus of Lyon, following Joseph Goldbrenner and such, and I think just sound anthropology. So each of us is called to an authentic existence. A full existence is who and what we are. Okay. And living that authentic existence is going to mean living, as Lonergan would say, attentively. Being attentive to the data, the givens of experience, my life and such, which includes that. Included in that data is my set of desires, the determination of my eros. Eros is always determinate. Mine is determinate in a particular way, which is, in fact, even the engine of existence. As Plato basically pointed out in the Phaedrus, and as the tradition accepts. So that's part of the data I have to wrestle with. Then you have to be inquisitive. That's if you're being authentic, you're being inquisitive. You're asking questions. What does this mean? What do I do with this? You're reflecting on it methodically, taking into account what your community is saying. That's part of the data. What your church teaches and such. But at the end of the day, I then have to make a judgment about those things. So I have to figure out, so what are the conditions for making that judgment, and have the conditions been fulfilled? And then only I can make that judgment. My community can't make that judgment for me. They can tell me how I should judge the data and the insights I have into that data, but it's me who has to make that judgment. So if I look at the data, if I look at my community's teachings on these things, and I think there are problems with the way that I'm pressured to live this out, and the arguments backing up the various positions don't hold water, and it's not enough, that then I can start asking questions. And it's not enough. Someone would say, well, an authority has said that this or that is the way you should judge this. Well, hold on. Unless I know, then the question is, how do I know that this is an authority? Why should I accept this particular authority, interpreted, understood in this particular way? These are questions only I can answer, because it's only the individual actor, intelligent actor, who can answer them. So a mess of things. You do have the one sort of concrete example amidst all of this that I know of that has struck me as good is the relationship between Dunstan Thompson and Philip Trower. Dunstan Thompson was a 20th century American poet. He served in World War II, one of the probably most important, as far as I know, most important World War II poets. Very gay. He, after the war, so he was raised Catholic. He left the practice of his faith, slept around a good deal. His poetry is fairly rife with wrestlings with homoeroticism and such. He ends up meeting his lover, Philip Trower. They settle down, and some years after they settle down, Dunstan Thompson approached his lover and said, well, I'm thinking about returning to the practice of the faith. And if I do that, we're going to have to live celibate. We're going to have to live chastely. Are you okay with that? And then Philip said, well, Philip, who was not a Catholic, said, well, I've actually been thinking about entering the church. So, and so they did. Dunstan Thompson returned to the practice of his faith. Philip Trower entered the church with the blessing of a local priest. I mean, I wouldn't personally, whether a priest says yes or no, I don't really care in a certain sense. But there was a priest they respected who said this is fine. So they lived together basically as brothers until Dunstan Thompson's death. That's a possible route you can take, maybe, but an issue too is that if you try to live that in the church, everyone just assumes that you're having sex. Nobody seems to have the imagination necessary to, or they don't want to imagine different workings out of a gay life in the church.
And I wonder how much of that is, well, I think you ask me, and if I'm being perfectly honest with you, if I had to share a house with my wife, but we had to be celibate, I mean, chastity is a struggle now. I mean, I don't think anyone's jumping any conclusions that you put us in the house long enough and we're gonna engage in some hanky panky. So I think the natural assumption is, well, this is all winking, nodding. Well, just they have a relationship doesn't mean they're doing anything behind closed doors, but they're saying, well, yeah, you are. I mean, you put two people that are attracted to each other in the same house together with no one else playing chaperone. It's only a matter of time before the clothes come off and the bodies go together.
Fair. And to be fair, so that's what I was presenting are reports that I've heard or read about the relationship. Philip Trower was working on a biography of Thompson, but he never finished it. And Trower is now dead. They're both dead. So we don't know. I mean, I would expect that they were. I would expect that they were physically involved afterwards at times, even if the general struggle was not to be. Yeah.
And I think probably the other problem too is and this is, again, you put me in a house with my wife, even if we keep our hands off each other, it's going to be really difficult for me to be chaste on an individual level. And I don't know, I personally, because of what you said, like the loneliness is not a good human condition.
No.
And I'm just, it seems to me, both on a kind of a philosophical, emotional level, and just a practical level, like if you ever wanted to like have a house and have someone to share bills with or share vacations or make life decisions if you're in the hospital and someone's got to decide, like, that's something that you don't necessarily have, or it doesn't come automatically to you as it does for those of us that are married. I
Right.
totally get that. And it's all said, no, we can't do it because we don't trust you to be in the same house together and not be involved yourself or being unchaste because you're in that same house and you can't be together. Like, however we do it, sinning is happening, or it's such a near occasion of sin that it's just reckless to do that. That
Mm.
seems to be the attitude. um, I guess I'm more of an optimist than that, and I like to think that people, I mean, my thought is this: the people that don't have a moral issue with and just engaging in whatever activity they want are going to do it with or without a blessing. But the
Right.
people such as yourself that at least want or would like to be celibate and chaste, why should you be deprived of these other luxuries and benefits of households and committed relationships and growing old with someone, especially if you can't have children, or at least can't have biological children?
Right.
Why do we just slam the door on those people? That I don't understand, and it sounds like you don't either. But I think that's a major issue. I think we can do better as a church than what we currently offer.
And here it's doing better isn't, and I'd want to emphasize this, it's not necessarily because there's it seems like that people are working with a false dichotomy, maybe. So
Mm-hmm.
thinking you're either allowed to have this, a committed personal and by implication, sexual relationship with someone,
Mm-hmm.
or you're doomed to loneliness and such.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's true.
Mm-hmm.
You could have you could be celibate and single, but then you live within a community that you live within a community which the gay Catholic really can't do right now. You live in a community that accepts you and loves you in your determinateness, and has developed structures and is maintaining structures whereby you can be an integral, positively contributing member of that community.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have that. And if you have that, then okay, you go home and, well, if you had that, all of these other things wouldn't necessarily be an issue. I mean, part of it too is that the fragmentation of modern life and the
Mm-hmm.
atomization of modern living or modern lives. But if you, so for instance, someone like me, I mean, if it's like he lives in the community, and I'm in a community that takes care of me, I take care of them, like we have this mutual relationship. Yeah, I'm going home alone, but I'm a full and accepted member of the community
Mm-hmm.
who is doing good work. And then when things go wrong, there's a recognition. He is not married. He does not
Mm-hmm.
have these supports. We
Yeah.
support him because we actually give a damn, if I may. I mean, about people.
Yeah.
So long as you're saying here's a teaching, here's what you need to abide by. Well, that's you can't quite stop there.
Yeah.
If you're going to say this is what you have to do, it's like with, I mean, analogously, married couples facing contraceptive use.
Mm-hmm.
You can say, okay, you have to do these things. Well, okay, now create or help create and sustain the conditions necessary to live this out in a fully integral, healthy way. You are not doing this.
Right.
Clerics, prelates, from bishops onto the Pope, all the way down. You are not doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are not doing this,
Yeah.
I don't know what we're doing. I don't know why you're getting upset when people don't.
Yeah.
And two, I even wonder. I mean, just from the standpoint of moral responsibility, you are saying these are the things you have to do, but you're not, in a certain sense, only the community has the ability, I mean, in her members, to create the conditions where you can actually live these things out in a healthy way. But if you're not doing that, how much responsibility devolves onto the individual living in these unnecessarily difficult situations? I don't know. It seems like a legitimate question to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Got a little intense there. Sorry. I about these things.
I would be. I have my intensities, but I think I would have the same intensities if I was in your situation. So I totally respect that. Okay. Well, I know we've been going a while, and I will want to wrap this up soon, both for us and probably for the viewers. I think this is something that we should definitely resume at a later date. I know one thing I did want to talk to you about, and if this is too big of a topic to bite off towards the end here, let me know. But you talked about conscience, and that's something that I have really wrestled with. What does that mean? And and how far does that go? And what is that? For example, is the primacy of conscience such that it can permit someone to do something that the church says is gravely immoral, or is that untouchable and it's more on the sort of peripheral stuff that's not intrinsically evil, good or bad, but there's some discretion there? But again, I don't know why it matters at that point in time, because like you said, do we can our conscience say going to mass is not good for me, or contraception is okay for my marriage, it's better than the alternative? Likewise, when you're talking about conscience within your standpoint, do you see conscience as something that should really talk about what someone's life looks like in a celibate way, or do you think it can go so far as to say, a Catholic gay person, their conscience could be such that it could permit or require them to engage in activity that the church says is immoral? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, not going to mass, that would be a little different insofar as, I mean, the modern discourse around that is way stricter than older discourses. I mean, if you pick up like a manual from the 18th century and you look at some of them, any one of them I saw years ago, it's like, no, if you have a non-trivial reason for not going, you don't go. And right, so I say, well, if you're excused from going due to physical health, you're also excused from going for the sake of mental health.
Right. Okay.
But no, only I can make that judgment. And I think I'm making that judgment well, and so I'm confident that before God, I'm going to be fine, whatever other people say. But yeah. So what conscience? I mean, an issue is that, as far as I've experienced it, it's you have something given with one hand and then very quickly taken with another. It's, well, primacy of conscience we affirm, and you find various documents affirming it. The discussion you had with that fellow a while ago, I think it was a retired priest, he was talking about conscience and such, and some things Ratzinger even wrote. It's like, no, if your conscience tells you to do something, even if the church says not to, you have to follow your conscience. But then the question is, what is conscience? And as far as I can tell, I mean, it's not a feeling. You can have all sorts of feelings, but conscience is ultimately at least worked out in a judgment about what is to be done and what is to be avoided. So, and knowledge of what I should do or I shouldn't do, which is ultimately going to be what is going to lead me to what is going to be the way for me to be both human and to love, to act intelligently. So it's ultimately expressed in a judgment. where any knowledge ultimately is expressed in a judgment. You don't know something unless you can express it, unless you express it, affirm it in a judgment. That judgment is responsible if you've recognized the conditions for making that judgment and that those conditions have been met. And then you affirm it, and then you act accordingly. So if I have to make a judgment, let's say, okay, do I pursue a romantic relationship or not? Is this going to be in accord with what I think, in fact, is good, what I can affirm to be good? And you have a set of data that's available to me, including myself and my own desires. I have the data of the sciences and such, and then I have various purported authorities. But the issue with authorities is that just because someone says it's someone can say it's an authority, I can be taught to reverence it as an authority, but then at the end of the day, the question is, what do I think? If I accept that it is I who am accepting it, taking a stand on that. So until I've determined, and it's up to me to do this, I can't shirk this responsibility, but then you say, okay, I have been formed to accept these as authorities understood in these particular ways. Is that true? Well, now I have to be inquisitive. I have to start asking, what are the conditions for affirming that this is an authority in that way, and that in fact what they're saying here is an authoritative statement? Other people saying that it is so doesn't count as a judgment on my side. So I have to look at that and say, okay, what are the conditions for judging that? Have the conditions been met? Do I have access to the data necessary to make that affirmation? If not, I don't know. I don't know if it's an authority. Then I can talk about probabilities, but so that's the approach I would take. It's like I've been, and a lot of Catholics would say this is anathema, but I am someone endowed with intelligence who finds himself a Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
I've been formed to think various things. The community around me people will say various things, but now I have to take responsibility for what I take a stand on. And that's sort of the approach I take. And if I do that attentively, if I do that intelligently, inquisitively, if I do it reflectively, and I try to do it responsibly and lovingly, ultimately, things are going to be fine. I think you have to have that basic trust in intelligence, which God-given intelligence.
Yeah, that makes sense, and that's, I guess, more or less how I've come to it, because the common response that I'll hear, and you've probably heard this too as well, if your conscience is telling you to do something the church says is gravely immoral, your conscience clearly can't be well formed. Like, you got to have a well formed conscience, and by definition, your conscience can't be well formed. I mean, that's the common response. And then I'm just like, well, okay, if that's the case, if your conscience must ultimately align with authoritative teaching, then the whole concept of conscience is hollow. It's not real. Like, it's
pardon me, you broke.
Okay, so we're continuing to have some technical difficulties, so I'm going to recap, make sure I got that point out. So the common response being that if your conscience tells you to do something that the church has said, let's say authoritatively, infallibility or whatever, is gravely immoral or intrinsically evil, by definition, your conscience cannot be well formed and you shouldn't follow it. That's the common response. And my response to that is, well, a lot of the things that they say, first of all, that are authoritative, I think are not fallible and therefore could be fallible. But even more so, if you have to just align your conscience to all these things anyway, then the concept of a conscience itself is a fiction. It doesn't really mean anything. And I don't know. I don't know you could ever really get rid of that tension. But and this is why a lot of the people in our community, when they have these conversations, say, it sounds like I'm damned if I do, damned if I don't. Like, and I that's a real struggle. A struggle that I think people that don't find themselves with that conflict of conscience, that just say, yeah, I happily accept, and I have real world problem following these things.
Yeah.
Just can't understand how someone could feel otherwise. I think that is the main reason for this miscommunication or fighting.
Yes. And if I may, I think that so conscience. So basically, what's affirmed, at least indirectly, is that conscience is an interior thing. And I think if you follow the tradition from Aquinas on, it's ultimately expressed in a judgment, and only you can make a judgment. Your community can want you to make or say that you have to make this judgment or that judgment, but ultimately it's only you who can make it. And it's only you who are held responsible for it before God. So one thing, it's right. So it, as an interior thing, it's affirmed, but then that's taken away when they come in and say, but if you are not, if it's not telling you to do all these things externally imposed, then it's malformed and you shouldn't follow it. You should follow these things. So either it's an interior thing or it's an external reality or reality external to the individual intelligent agent.
Yeah.
It can't be both.
Right.
There can be a dialectical relationship between interior work and then the community. Yes, I think finally there's excellent reason for thinking reason is a communal reality in a number of ways. I mean, the reality of language suggests as much. Language is given by my community. I think through language. I reflect in language. I affirm things in language. So there is that, but it is I who reflect and affirm and such. So my approach to it, if someone comes to me and they say, well, the church says this or that, and so you can't act, your consciousness is malformed. So that's external in some sense to the work of my conscience, my moral reasoning. I can then ask, well, you're here trying to force me in this direction. Why should I? So how do you know what you're saying? So you think that you know this and that I don't. So if you know this, you know what the conditions are for affirming that in a judgment, and you recognize that those conditions have been met. Well, tell me what the conditions are, and then show me how they've been met. Most people, I as far as I can tell, if you start pressing them on that, very quickly you find out there's a lot of there's affectivity here. I had a feeling about that. Well, this is what Father Joe said. Well, hold on. Then the question is, why should I take Father Joe as an authority in this way, and why should I accept his interpretation of these things? Well, Father Joe is a priest. Well, hold on. Why is that enough? So you can fight that battle quite effectively if you start thinking about what is involved in moral reasoning and judgment and such, and knowledge. Push back against those who would want to force you to go a particular way. Give yourself that distance such that you can then, in greater peace, before God, who loves us and who gives us the very means by which we can do this at every moment, and start thinking through it ourselves. I think too, I mean, it talks about conscience have struck me as growing out of an implicit an idea of God that as I go on, I can't, used to be my idea of God, but not so much anymore. An idea of God is sort of this the cold, distant judge, exacting judge, and wrathful father who's out to sort of get you. And unless you do violence to yourself, to conform yourself to this sort of Procrustean bed, I guess, that people have set up, you're going to be damned. But that doesn't make sense. I'm only intelligent because I share in the light of the Logos. I can only love because I participate in the very love of God. And so I look at those things as they are in me, and I do them better and such when I'm at peace, when I'm working on them in peace, working them out in peace. Peace is a note of intellection undertaken, love undertaken well. So this idea of God I can't accept. So that's sort of like when I not going to church, or if it's whatever, it's like, who is the God I stand before, as I work out matters of conscience and such. If it's the God who won't let me do that, then this is all just absurd. But if it is, then I'm fine. If
Yeah.
that, yeah.
Yeah, I think I kind of have come to a similar sense of peace about this, that if either God is merciful is the right word, but more understanding and I guess loving,
Mm-hmm.
then he's going to understand the sincerity of my motivation, the efforts and stuff like that, and is going to judge me accordingly.
Yeah.
And if it's a God that is going to object me, judge me harshly, despite that, that doesn't sound like a perfect God. It sounds like a God that really doesn't exist. Like, right, like that vindictive, seemingly imperfect God either doesn't exist, or if God does exist as we believe, has to be able to see where we're at, and that does give me some hope and peace as well. And I doesn't mean that the struggle doesn't exist and you don't lose some angst. But at the end of the day, it allows me to sleep at night, allows me to get up on in front of this camera and talk about this stuff all the time, because I am. I mean, I think I am sincere. I believe you're sincere, and I think this is exactly what we're supposed to be doing. And I'm very thankful for you to come on and share this. This would be a hard thing to do, and so I'm really glad that you've come on and shared things. I'm going to give you the opportunity to give the final word, but we're coming on to an hour and a half, and we'll have to resume at another time. I want to give you the final word, and then we'll wrap up.
Oh, I appreciate that. No, I appreciate the chance to come on and talk about this with you, Craig. I mean, I can do it comfortably now, more or less. It wasn't so before, and I'm happy to maybe say some things that others who do not feel so comfortable or can take some solace from. Hey, here's someone who's wrestling with this too.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it's a chance for me to work out my thinking. I'm fairly well convinced there's no such thing as a fully thought out thought that hasn't been expressed to someone. So you've given me a chance to think here, and I appreciate that.
And we've enjoyed your contribution to our Discord. And here's what I'll tell people: if they, I'm going to give you a chance. If you have a way that people could reach out to you, if they want to get a hold of you, I'm give you. If not, I'll always tell people, send us an email, unchartedcatholicman@gmail.com. If you'd like to talk to Matthew or reach out to him, you're certainly welcome to email us, and I'll put you guys in touch with each other. If you're on any socials or anything like that, Matthew, that you're willing to share, that people can send you a DM or anything, feel free to do so.
Sure. Yeah. So I like the email there. I mean, if anyone contacts you and you want to forward that to me, that would be great. We could have a correspondence that way. I would say I am on Twitter, probably way more than I should be.
All of us are. Shoot. Okay.
All right.
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
So I can be reached. So Twitter, my Twitter handle is Ghost Owl Redux, one word, all lowercase, GHOSTOWLREDUX. I'm on there probably more than I should. Please be patient with me if I don't get back to you, if you DM me. Different things happen at different times, but I'm happy to have conversations with serious people.
All right. Well, thank you again, Matthew. I've really enjoyed this. I'm very confident that there will be people out there that will hear this and really appreciate it. So thank you again. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, JD, for hanging out in the comments. And until next time, everyone, have a good one.